My mother-in-law and I are pregnant at the same time. A year after we got married, I found out I was pregnant. Unexpectedly, my husband was even more excited than I was. Honey, this is great. You're pregnant too. Wait, too? Could there be someone else who's pregnant as well? Mom is pregnant too. Our family is truly blessed with double happiness. Come home early after work today. Both your parents are here. My heart skipped a beat. Ryan's mom, my 49-year-old mother-in-law, is also pregnant. Definitely a high-risk pregnancy. To make matters worse, although my in-laws are healthy, they're terrible with money, earning one, spending two, and they can't even scrape together a few hundred yuan. By the time we got married, we were completely broke, with a total bride price of just 30,000 yuan, which they found an excuse to take back the very next day after the wedding. At that time, I was new to the family, thin-skinned, and out of respect for my elders, I didn't make a fuss. I thought that in the future, Ryan and I would live alone, and as long as Ryan treated me well, that would be enough. But I never expected that my mother-in-law would get pregnant, and without a word, she moved into our house. I had a strong feeling that this family would never find peace again. Coming home in a daze, I opened the door to see a happy scene of 3 generations together. My mother-in-law was sitting on the sofa, eating cherries, something I usually couldn't bear to buy for myself. Ryan was crouched on the floor, picking up the seeds his mom had spit out. Meanwhile, Grandpa was standing nearby, watching Grandma with a beaming smile. What an enviable little family of 3, I thought to myself. If only they didn't overlook me, the daughter-in-law, it would be even better. I called Ryan's name 3 times at the door, but he didn't hear me. Finally, on the 4th call, he turned his head. He jogged over, took the bag off me, and hung it on the rack. I was thinking Ryan had grown up, that he knew how to care for his wife, when I heard him say, "Honey, you're finally back. I'm starving. Why don't you go make some food?" A flicker of displeasure crossed my mind, and I froze in place. What's this? You don't work, you've been resting at home all day, and now you expect your pregnant wife to come back and cook for you? You really have some nerve. Noticing the change in my expression, Ryan quickly added, "Honey, my parents are here. Just do this for me, okay?" Considering my in-laws were around, I couldn't really get mad at Ryan, so I resigned myself and went into the kitchen. But when I saw celery and pork laid out on the table, I felt my defenses crumble all over again. I'm allergic to celery and never eat it. Even touching it makes me uncomfortable. I had no choice but to call Ryan over. "Mom likes celery and meat buns, so please bear with it, good wife. Thank you for your hard work." What else could I say? I just had to do it. After more than an hour of effort, the meal was finally ready. When I placed the buns on the table, my mother-in-law took a small bite and then put them down. "Sophie, you put green onions in these buns, didn't you? They have such a strong smell." She frowned, clutching her chest, looking like she was about to vomit. Ryan immediately leaned over to his mother, playing the dutiful son. "Mom, are you okay? Don't feel bad. I'll have Sophie make a new batch." My mother-in-law continued to pout. "When will we finally get to eat?" "Sophie, you two didn't even ask if your mother-in-law, was still in your eyes." Ryan was still defending his mom. "Sophie, apologize to Mom right now." "Why should I?" I felt a bit resentful. She never told me about her dietary restrictions. Am I supposed to be Zhuge Liang with the power to foresee the future? Although I was a little upset, I still lowered my head. "Sorry, Mom. I forgot to ask today. I'll definitely be more careful next time." I thought that would be the end of it, but unexpectedly, my father-in-law was relentless. "Go to the kitchen right now and make another meal for your mom." I glanced at the clock. It was already 10 at night. If I had to cook, eat, shower, and sleep now, it would be way past midnight. How am I supposed to work tomorrow? Besides, I'm pregnant. Thinking this, I turned to Ryan, hoping he'd say something to me. But to my surprise, he fully agreed with his dad. "Yeah, Sophie, you better go now. Mom's been hungry for half the day." The moment Ryan opened his mouth, I was so furious I could barely hold it in. It's so unfair. They just show up without a heads up, my in-laws decide to come over, and the three of them stay home all day while I, who worked all day, have to come back and cook. After finally finishing the meal, not a single word of thanks, and they even found faults. What? Do I enjoy being a doormat? Just love rushing to please you all? No way. I slammed my chopsticks on the table, turned around, and went back to my room. I'm not here to serve anyone. If you want to eat, eat. If not, get lost. The whole farce ended with Ryan ordering takeout for his mom. Of course, that came with plenty of scolding and curses directed at me. I didn't care. I'm thick-skinned anyway. For people like Ryan's parents, it's better to come off as a shrew than a doormat any day. At night, I lay in bed, watching Ryan flick his fingers beside me. A sudden wave of irritation washed over me. Honey, how long are your parents planning to stay this time? Ryan glanced at me sideways, then went back to playing his game. We have to wait until Mom gives birth, right? What? Mom is really going to have the baby and live with us? She's almost 50 this year. That's so risky. Besides, who's going to raise the child after it's born? Ryan tossed his phone aside. Sophie, why are you being so unreasonable? Ever since my parents arrived today, you've been complaining nonstop. What? Do you look down on my parents or something? Seeing Ryan acting foolish, I refused to indulge him. I'm unreasonable? And you're the voice of reason? You expect your pregnant wife to come home after a full day of work and chop meat to make buns for you all. Ryan, you've been living the good life for a few days and forgotten what it was like before, haven't you? We only earn a little over $10,000 a month. After paying rent, the car loan, and daily expenses, how much can we really save each month? Not buying a house? Are you planning to have our child continue renting after they're born? Ryan knew he was in the wrong and didn't argue back. He just weakly said, Sophie, I'll try to talk to Mom, so don't be mad. I told myself I wasn't an unreasonable person. I had no problem with Ryan being filial to his parents. Usually, when he secretly sent money to them, I turned a blind eye and pretended not to know. But now that I'm pregnant, my priority has to be my own child. If Ryan's parents were capable of supporting themselves, I wouldn't say anything. But they haven't worked for years and have no income. Is the child supposed to survive on air after birth? Or are they planning to have us raise the baby? Lost in these wild thoughts, I gradually drifted off to sleep. The next day, as soon as I woke up, my whole body ached. Especially my arms, they felt swollen, and even lifting them was a struggle. I guessed it was probably because I'd been busy with work lately, hadn't exercised, my physical condition had declined, and on top of that, I had been chopping meat last night. There was no time to think much. I was running late. I hurriedly tried to rush to the bathroom to wash up. But the door was locked. My mother-in-law was inside, and from the sound, she was probably washing her face. Mom, I'm almost late for work. Could you please open the door so I can get in too? I called out a few times, but there was no response from inside. After anxiously waiting by the door for 10 minutes, my mother-in-law finally came out. She pressed her hand against the door and asked my father-in-law to bring her a change of underwear. When he handed it to her, she slammed the door shut again with a bang. I finally understood it was intentional. If I hadn't been in such a rush to get to work, I definitely would have confronted them. Carrying all that anger inside, I hurried to the bathroom at the company to compose myself before starting work. Maybe it was the rough morning, but I was off all day, making frequent mistakes at work. By the end, even my boss's expression had turned sour. I quickly washed my face to calm down. At such a critical moment, I couldn't afford to lose my job. Finally, the workday ended, and thinking it was Friday and I could rest tomorrow, I sent Ryan a WeChat message and went with colleagues to eat at a mall near the company. After dinner, we strolled around the street a bit before heading home. Little did I know that this very action would stir up a storm at home. The moment I walked in, I sensed something was off. My father-in-law and mother-in-law sat on the sofa, their faces ashen, glaring at me with clear displeasure. Ryan shrank to the side. "What's wrong?" I had just asked when my mother-in-law's slipper flew over, nearly hitting my face. "You unfilial daughter-in-law, how dare you come back? You heartless woman, you actually incited my son to drive us away, and you want me to abort the child in my belly?" My mother-in-law was panting heavily, shouting at me in anger. I glanced at Ryan. "Aren't you going to say something?" Ryan kept his head down, not daring to utter a word. It seemed he had already been turned against me by his parents. With no allies, I had no choice but to fight alone. I put down the things I had bought and took slow, deliberate steps toward my mother-in-law. Listening to her accusations, truly a child without parents, not even knowing basic decency. Rage boiled inside me, and I grabbed the water on the coffee table and poured it out. The loss of my parents had always been the deepest pain in my heart. My mother-in-law had no right, absolutely no right, to insult my deceased parents. That was my bottom line. Seeing my mother-in-law's face drenched in tears, my father-in-law couldn't hold back anymore. He clenched his fists and was about to come at me. Of course, I wasn't going to stand there and let him hit me. I ran straight to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and shouted, "Come on, I dare anyone to lay a hand on me. Is there no law left? Coming into my house to hit me?" Seeing I was serious, my father-in-law hesitantly lowered his raised hand. My husband, who had been playing dumb, suddenly snapped to attention and rushed over to take the knife from my hand. "What's with the knives in the family?" My hands trembled uncontrollably. "Do you even consider me family? I'm pregnant. Has anyone cared to ask me how I'm doing? Has anyone even asked me a single question?" At this, I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. They streamed down my face. The words I'd been holding inside finally came out. My in-laws aren't my biological parents, so I have no right to blame them for not caring about me. But Ryan, he's my husband, the person I'm supposed to spend my life with. After finding out I was pregnant, he ignored me completely and only cared about his mother. How could I possibly feel okay about that? Seeing me cry, Ryan's tone softened. "It's my fault, Sophie. I promise I'll treat you well from now on." He had made that promise so many times before that, honestly, I was starting to doubt it. I wiped my tears and turned to face my in-laws. "Since you say you want to keep the baby, let me ask, how do you plan to raise this child once it's born?" My father-in-law stiffened his neck. "Of course, we'll raise the child ourselves." "You'll raise it yourselves?" I scoffed. "Do you have a salary or a pension? Do you think raising a child is like before, just giving them a meal? Nowadays, it costs money." His tone weakened. "There's always a way to get by. Besides, if we don't have money, don't you have some? You're their older brother and sister-in-law. You can't just ignore this." My mother-in-law chimed in. "Yeah, once this child is born, they're family too. You can't just walk away. Ryan, the baby in my belly is your own little brother or sister. It means Ryan has to take care of it." Honestly, I was about to blow a fuse, and of course, my mother-in-law kept nagging. "Ryan, the doctor said the baby in my belly is developing well. It's just that my nutrition is a bit lacking." The implication was clear even if she didn't say it. I understood. After tonight's ordeal, I could see that the baby in my mother-in-law's womb absolutely had to be born. "Mom, Dad, you probably already know Ryan has been unemployed for 2 months now. This family is being supported by me alone. He doesn't have a single penny. When we got married, you didn't buy us a house or a car, no bride price, no gold jewelry. Ryan's duty is to respect you, but raising your child is not his responsibility. I'm putting it out there today, if you decide to have the baby, I won't pay a single cent." After saying that, I turned and locked myself in the room. I need to think carefully about what I should do to ensure our little family comes out unscathed. But no matter what, it seems impossible to come out completely unscathed. After all, once the child is born, it's a life you can't just watch him starve to death, can you? Unless we get a divorce. Only then can I live peacefully, like I used to. I sighed. I really don't want to take it this far unless absolutely necessary. Maybe it was something I said yesterday that upset my father-in-law. The next day, he was already clamoring to go out and find work. But he's over 50, what kind of job could he possibly find? Probably just something like a security guard. Sure enough, he went out for a while and came back beaming, telling us he had found a job as a security guard in the neighborhood next door. Usually, work wasn't busy. I just needed to register visitor information and such. He deliberately glanced at me and said, "We're not here to eat for free, you know." I knew he was talking to me, but it didn't matter. As long as they didn't cause trouble, I'd be grateful. However, it didn't take long before something happened. My father-in-law got into a fight and was taken to the police station. When I got the call, I thought it was a mistake. Wasn't my father-in-law at work? How did he end up detained for no reason? Later, when I rushed over, I found out he had a dispute with a resident, kicked the person, and the other party wasn't willing to let it go and called the police. Seeing my father-in-law in the detention center, head down and looking guilty, I really felt exhausted. In the end, it was Ryan who apologized repeatedly, bowed his head, almost to the point of kowtowing, before the other party agreed to mediation. We paid over 10,000 yuan and brought my father-in-law back home. Now it's just great, no money earned, and I lost my job. What a disappointing return. But unexpectedly, my father-in-law, after just 2 days of quiet, started causing trouble again. He wanted to deliver takeout and even bought an electric bike out of his own pocket. I had no hope for this. Who doesn't know that delivering takeout is tough and exhausting? If a lazybones like him could endure that kind of hardship, he wouldn't be this old with no savings at all. Sure enough, he gave up in less than a week and started lying around the house like a corpse. It was summer, hot and stifling. My father-in-law and mother-in-law didn't seem to care about keeping things discreet. Every day they were in the living room watching TV. Several times I left the house, saw the scene, and came back again. Can't you say something to your parents? They should at least be a bit more mindful at home. Ryan was indifferent. They're old, some habits are hard to change. Sophie, you're the younger generation. You need to be understanding. So, if he's not the one suffering, he just stays out of it, huh? To vent my frustration, I set the photos of my in-laws to be visible only to Ryan and posted them on social media. Within 5 minutes, Ryan gave in. "I'll talk to my parents." "Can you delete the photos from social media? They don't look good." So, you do realize it's embarrassing after all. All these little things added up, making me more and more disappointed in this marriage. Especially recently, the baby is already 3 months along, and the morning sickness has gotten pretty bad. I can't eat well every day, can't sleep well, work is busy, and on top of that, all these family issues, I can feel my temper getting worse and worse. I was really afraid that one day I would truly break down and explode. But I never expected that day to come so soon. That morning, I had just gotten up and was about to go to the kitchen to get a glass of water when I suddenly slipped and fell to the ground. In that moment, my stomach hurt unbearably. After being rushed to the hospital, the doctor's words completely crushed me. He said, "I'm sorry, the baby is no longer there." How could this be? My baby had been living with me for 3 months already. I could feel him growing every day. I was so joyfully looking forward to his arrival. How could he suddenly be gone? I sat there expressionless, listening to Ryan's comforting words. "Sophie, we will have children again in the future." Is that so? But any future child would never be him. After the dilation and curettage procedure, I took a week off from work to rest at home. However, when I returned home, I noticed some unusual things. There were actually a few beans on the kitchen floor. I looked and saw that the soybeans in the storage cabinet had indeed been tampered with. Was it accidental, or? My heart was pounding. After observing for several days, I finally caught a clue. In her room, my mother-in-law was whispering to my father-in-law. Do you think she's noticed? Probably not. I cleaned everything up that day. Good, then we can't be blamed for this. Who told her to be unfilial, not giving us any money, and strutting around the house like a queen just because she's pregnant? Now that her child is gone, she can finally settle down. From now on, The money she earns will be spent on us. Once you give birth, let her take care of you during your confinement. It turned out all of this was a scheme by my in-laws. They were so heartless that they caused the death of their own grandchild for their own benefit. I took a step back, barely steadying myself. This grudge I will definitely avenge. 10 days later, my body had mostly recovered, and it was time to go back to work. I now realize that this home is not a safe haven for me at all. It is a prison, trapping both my body and soul. As for Ryan, I am completely disappointed. I was blind before. Now I see I placed my trust in the wrong person. He is selfish, incompetent, blindly loyal, and foolishly filial. Even though I was weak, he went about his business without a shred of care. Every day, he either played games or slept. I had to call out several times just to get him to hand me a glass of water, let alone cook. These past few days, I've been surviving on takeout. Thinking back to when he was sick, I stayed up all night taking care of him. And how did he repay me? After coming to my senses, I no longer felt any affection for him. I've already decided to get a divorce, but before that, there are some things I need to do. After all, when you do something wrong, you have to pay the price. Ryan's parents observed me for a few days. Seeing nothing unusual about me, they assumed I hadn't discovered their despicable actions and gradually grew more arrogant. If there wasn't a big meat dish at home, they couldn't eat a thing. Our lives are so hard, getting old and still having to suffer like this. Ryan put on the devoted son act. Mom, what's wrong with you? Grandpa immediately spoke up. It's the baby in your mom's belly craving pork knuckle. Ryan frowned. Sophie, go buy a pork knuckle later and stew it for Mom. Got it? I quickly agreed. My cooperation made Ryan suspicious. Sophie, why are you? I've just come to terms with it. After all, the child in my belly is gone, so I might as well focus on nurturing the one in Mom's. After all, it's your own blood. Hearing my answer, Ryan's parents exchanged a subtle glance and chuckled quietly. What a bunch of fools. After work, I went to the supermarket and bought a pork knuckle and some large cuts of meat. When I got home, I stewed them with all kinds of seasonings for a full 2 hours until the knuckle was falling apart. The rich aroma filled the entire room. As expected, my mother-in-law couldn't resist and ate 3 big bowls of rice. After finishing, she leisurely sprawled in her chair, rubbing her round, swollen belly and sighed contentedly. Seeing this, I immediately said, Mom, if you want to eat, I'll cook for you again next time. Ryan's mom smiled brightly and said, Great, then next time I want pig's trotters. Sure, I replied. That's how we kept going, and after 2 months, Ryan's parents had both gained a lot of weight. Especially Ryan's mom, whose face had swollen up like a steamed bun. Although the doctor had warned her that she was older and already had high blood pressure, so she shouldn't overindulge or it could cause problems, she didn't care. She still bossed me around, ordering me to cook all kinds of delicious food for her. Of course, I agreed. After all, it wasn't me who was uncomfortable. And I wasn't about to let Ryan off the hook either. These past few months, with the job market tough, he'd been staying home all the time, relying entirely on me to support him. I definitely don't want him to have an easy life. I deliberately made it a bit hard to say, Honey, why don't you go find a job? The moment Ryan heard that, his face immediately changed. I quickly added, It's not that I'm looking down on you, honey. It's just that there's only a few thousand yuan left at home. Mom is pregnant now, about to enter the late stage, and she'll give birth soon. Our family doesn't have a single penny right now, so what are we going to do? But don't we still have over 100,000? And don't you still have your salary? Ryan is really shameless. But I had already thought of a plan. Mom has been saying she's been sleeping poorly lately and only eating the best supplements, and those things aren't cheap at all. Besides, I recently made a big mistake and got demoted, so my monthly salary might only be 4,000 or 5,000 now. You don't want your parents to suffer, do you? In the end, Ryan gave in and promised me he would start looking for a job the next day. I sneered inwardly, realizing I had been too foolish. Only now did I see he was such an irresponsible man. But his good days were about to come to an end. He couldn't really think I had changed, could he? What woman could go through something like this and just pretend nothing happened, continuing to live with him as if all were well? Naturally, I transferred the money from the card. Although it was only 100,000 yuan, it was money I had painstakingly saved bit by bit. I wasn't about to let Ryan have it for free. And the demotion? That was pure fiction, something I made up. I wanted him to understand the pain of having to pay for my sake. A few days later, Ryan found a job as a real estate agent at a company near our home. Although the base salary wasn't high, the job was flexible and didn't require sitting at a desk, which perfectly suited Ryan's love for slacking off. So the next day, he went to work. Meanwhile, the baby in my mother-in-law's belly was already 6 months along. Because of her age and poor health, she had recently started waking up frequently at night. Sometimes, leg cramps kept her awake the entire night. I was happy inside but wore my worries on my face. All I could do was cook delicious food every day to comfort her wounded spirit. She's now about 1.5 meters tall and weighs 180 kg. It looked quite frightening. The doctor said that if things continued like this, the consequences could be severe, possibly a tragedy involving both mother and child. Probably out of fear, Ryan's mother held back for a few days, but it only lasted a few days at most. Actually, during this time, I also considered whether I should just let go, get a divorce, and live my own life. But after much thought, I decided I couldn't. First, I couldn't let go of the hatred in my heart, and second, I didn't think Ryan would easily agree to a divorce. It would inevitably drag on for a long time. So I came up with another plan. Ryan had been coming home very late lately, and he often quietly replied to messages in the bathroom. Every time I approached, he would instinctively switch screens and sneak a glance at me. My intuition told me something was definitely going on. Sure enough, while he was asleep, I unlocked his phone. At the top was a chat history with a girl. They had been chatting for months, calling each other husband and wife, and to make meeting up easier, that girl had even recently started working at Ryan's company. Looking at the disgusting chat logs on the social app, I felt a wave of nausea. So, while I was out working hard to earn money, my husband was using my money to date other women. What a joke! I don't know if it's because I've already given up on Ryan, but after seeing this message, I didn't feel a bit sad. While Ryan was asleep, I took screenshots and sent them to myself, then deleted the records. It's like sleepiness handing me a pillow. This evidence came at just the right time. Anyway, Ryan is working now, so when the money runs out, I'll just ask him for more. His mother is about to reach her due date. Who knows when she'll give birth? I have to prepare properly. All the baby clothes have to be the best, and I bought 10 sets at once. For diapers, I bought the most expensive ones. The stroller has to be a brand name. What's a couple thousand more? I bought it. When we got home, Ryan looked at the stuff on the floor, a flicker of pain crossing his face. Why did you buy so many things? He picked up the receipt and looked at it, then exclaimed exaggeratedly, "What kind of car is this? So expensive." I put on a stern face. These are all necessities. But you don't have to buy such good ones. Aren't a few hundred yuan ones just as useful? How can they be the same? Of course, brand names are better. Are you feeling stingy? I shifted the topic, or are you reluctant to spend money on mom? Just then, my mother-in-law was in the living room, holding her belly and drinking water. Ryan, how can you be so selfish? You're reluctant to spend money on your mom, but you're better with Sophie. She knows how to care for me. Ryan awkwardly waved his hand. No, how could I be reluctant to spend money on mom? Though he said that, I could see his teeth were clenched so hard they looked like they might shatter. I sneaked a smile. This is just the beginning. You'll have plenty more troubles ahead. Time quickly passed to a month later, and my mother-in-law was about to give birth. As soon as Ryan's mom went into labor, she was rushed to the hospital. The doctor said she was older and the baby was too big, so a cesarean section was necessary. Sitting on the bench outside the operating room, family members anxiously waited from time to time. Occasionally, one or two kind-hearted people would ask, "Who is the one having the baby inside to you?" When they found out it was my mother-in-law, their expressions became somewhat intriguing. At the same time, there was an unmistakable hint of sympathy, as if to say, this woman's hard days are just beginning. My mother-in-law really was blessed with great fortune, giving birth to a big, healthy boy weighing over 7 pounds, who was safely wheeled to the inpatient ward. My father-in-law's grin stretched almost to his ears, constantly shouting, "Son," as if afraid no one would know this was his bloodline. I watched them and thought, laugh all you want, soon you won't be able to. While Ryan and the others were still at the hospital, I took a taxi to the apartment I had rented long ago. At the same time, I called him, "Honey, I'm really sorry. The company suddenly sent me on a business trip out of town." "What?" I could almost see Ryan's eyes widening on the other end. "Then who will take care of Mom?" I deliberately put on an anxious tone. "I'm really sorry, honey. I don't want to go either, but the company said if I don't, they'll fire me. The little uncle just had a baby and there are so many expenses. Honey, if I lose my job, what will happen to our family? Anyway, Dad is home now. You two can take care of Mom together. I think it will definitely work out." But Ryan wanted to say more, but I had already hung up. If I don't run now, then when? Am I really supposed to serve these two murderers during her confinement? I have better things to do. 30 minutes later, I was already lying on the soft bed in the rented apartment. Just thinking about the miserable days ahead for Ryan's family made me laugh uncontrollably. I, Sophie, have never been one to accept losses easily. Before, I was willing to tolerate your family because there was love in my heart, but now all I feel is hatred. A week later, my mother-in-law was discharged from the hospital. She looked much weaker, with a towel wrapped around her head, barely able to get out of bed. But in just a few days, Ryan and his dad looked utterly haggard. If you didn't know better, you'd think they were the ones who had given birth. Haha. In the days that followed, besides working, my daily joy was watching them through the surveillance cameras. That's right, to keep a close eye on them, I installed cameras in the room. It turns out, you don't know pain until the stick hits you. Ryan and his dad are both terrible at taking care of anyone. The meals they made were either burnt or blackened, basically. Pretty hard to swallow. After Ryan's mom gave birth, her temper really flared up. At the slightest disagreement, she'd throw chopsticks, and when she got really angry, she'd even have trouble catching her breath. Ryan's dad already had white hairs popping up all over his head. Ryan himself looked like he'd aged 10 years. His cheekbones had sunken in. Of course, during all this, he often called me, but I always cut him off with excuses about meetings or work. He wanted me to be the scapegoat? No way. By the time I came back, it had already been a month. The moment I pushed open the door, I was hit by an indescribable smell, like something had gone sour. The place was a complete mess, trash scattered everywhere, and on the balcony, children's diapers and clothes were hanging out to dry. Seeing me return, Ryan almost burst into tears. "Sophie, you finally came back." "Ryan, I paused for a moment. "What happened to you? You've changed so much, I barely recognize you." He awkwardly scratched his stubble with one hand. "Ocean has been crying all night." Ocean is the boy Ryan's mother gave birth to. "Well, now that you're back, you can take Ocean to bed tonight." As if I'm some free babysitter. If I hadn't seen from the surveillance that my mother-in-law was on the brink, do you think I would have come back? I ignored him and went straight to put my suitcase in the room. Then I rushed to my mother-in-law's room. "Mom, are you okay?" Hearing my voice, she suddenly opened her eyes wide. "Sophie, you're back. You finally came back. Hurry and make me something to eat. Your dad and Ryan's cooking is terrible. I've been starving and losing weight all this time." "Sure." Looking at my mother-in-law's gaunt face, I agreed readily. But before I could finish cooking, something happened to her. This time she wasn't so lucky. She had a stroke and passed away before even reaching the hospital. We could only drive her body back. Ryan and his dad looked bewildered. How could someone perfectly fine just suddenly be gone? It's you. It's you who killed Mom. I shouted loudly. I went to Mom's room back then, and she told me it was all because you didn't take good care of her, often letting her go without food, which caused her health problems. You two are murderers. I pointed straight at them, and at that moment, my brother-in-law also burst into tears. A trace of fear appeared on Ryan's face. No, it wasn't me. I really didn't mean to withhold food from Mom. It's just that Mom didn't like the meals I cooked. I didn't listen to any of that. I grabbed my suitcase from the bedroom and walked out of the house. Once outside, I laughed out loud, laughing until tears streamed down my face. The villains finally got their comeuppance. If only my child were still here. A week after my mother-in-law's cremation, I officially asked Ryan for a divorce. He still didn't understand what was happening, his eyes wide open. Sophie, why? We were living well. Why suddenly ask for a divorce? I looked at his innocent expression and sneered in my heart. You think it's all fine, don't you? Ryan, I've had enough of you a long time ago. You killed your own child. Ryan, you really have a cold heart. That's right. Ryan was partly responsible for the death of the child in my womb. At first, I foolishly thought it was all a conspiracy by his parents. Later, I realized it happened with his tacit approval. In that moment, I even had the urge to kill him. Ryan started to panic. Sophie, it's not my fault. It was all my parents' idea. I just had no choice. I cut off Ryan's excuse. Don't say it. It's pointless. I slammed the divorce agreement on him. I advise you to sign it as soon as possible. Naturally, Ryan refused. He was unemployed now with no income, living off credit cards. Without my support, everyone knows how miserable his life would be. Moreover, he not only has himself now, but also his lazy father and his newborn baby brother. He's probably going to be stuck in this situation for life. At first, he would still beg me, send me texts, expressing how much he missed me. Later on, maybe because he lost hope, or perhaps because the child was tormenting him terribly, he started cursing like a sailor. Sophie, you bitch, still want a divorce? I'll drag you down with me. My dad was right. You've had someone else on your mind for a long time. You've got a lover on the side, haven't you? Reading those messages, I felt nothing at all. Until Ryan started insulting the child in my belly, calling it some bastard of unknown origin. The quickest and cruelest way to slander a woman is to spread rumors about her. This has been true throughout history. I decided to settle this quickly. I found the woman Ryan was cheating with. I offered her some conditions to have her help me put on a show. With her assistance, Ryan paid much less attention to me. Finally, after a month, Ryan agreed to my divorce request, but on the condition that I pay him 30,000 yuan. Of course, I refused. Now he was more anxious than I was. Vivian, that woman on the side, was now pressuring him to divorce, and she promised that as long as they got married, she would willingly help him raise the child. Ryan has this inexplicable confidence, always thinking everyone loves him. So this time, he believed it was his charm that won out, not realizing it was all my scheme. Soon, he couldn't withstand the pressure from the other side and compromised, going with me to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get the receipt. A month later, we went back to the bureau to collect the divorce certificate. Looking at the little red book in my hand, I burst into a smile. Then I sent Vivian a WeChat message, telling her she could make her move now. Vivian didn't hesitate either. She immediately booked a ticket back to her hometown and vanished from Ryan's sight. Honestly, I didn't do much either. I just told Vivian that I had the photos she had sent to Ryan before, and that I even knew where her hometown was, down to where her parents worked. If she didn't cooperate, I might lose my mind and accidentally post her photos online, or even cause a scene in her hometown. Anyone with a shred of dignity wouldn't be able to withstand that. Besides, Vivian only wanted to talk to Ryan. She never intended to destroy my family. A few days after everything happened, Ryan seemed to finally realize he had been deceived. He didn't blame me for it, though. Instead, he thought Vivian had tricked him. He even posted missing person notices on social media. Naturally, no one paid any attention. That idiot's so careless. He'd been cheating with a woman for almost a year and didn't even know exactly where her hometown was. If he wasn't the one being fooled, then who was? But none of this had anything to do with me anymore. Every day, I immersed myself in work, trying to numb myself with busyness. Yet, the peaceful life didn't last long. Ryan actually showed up at my workplace holding the baby, causing a scene at the entrance, accusing me of abandoning my wife and child, and demanding justice from the company. To minimize the disruption, the company had no choice but to bring him into the office to confront me face to face. He looked very thin now, his clothes hanging loosely on him. He was still holding my little brother-in-law, looking rather pitiful. The boss was a woman, and she seemed somewhat sympathetic. Ryan cooperated fully, tearfully recounting his tragic fate, and by the end, he was almost choking back sobs. It was clear he truly felt he was suffering. But what did that have to do with me? We're already divorced. Don't you have a heart, Sophie? I was wrong. Please come back. We're all waiting for you. The leader's saintly heart overflowed. Yes, Sophie. Considering the child is still so young, you should go back. After all, that's your own. The female leader's mouth twitched suddenly. No, Sophie, when did you have a child? How come I didn't know about it? Leader, you've misunderstood. That's not my son, it's my younger brother-in-law. The leader's face turned a bit awkward, as if she had swallowed a fly caught in between. She withdrew her previous kindness toward Ryan. This is outrageous. Your in-laws basically gave birth to a child for you. I even thought they were being pitiful. Sophie, you did the right thing running away. Seeing the leader's change in attitude, Ryan began to argue stubbornly. Once we raise Ocean, he'll definitely be filial to us. The female leader made a call, directly summoned the security guard, and kicked Ryan out. Later, Ryan came to cause trouble a few more times. Although everyone knew I wasn't at fault, no one could stand such a commotion. To avoid affecting everyone, I painfully submitted my resignation. Honestly, I was a bit reluctant to leave. Although the leader was strict at times, I had been with the company for 3 years, knew the business inside out, and the salary was decent. Leaving so suddenly really made me feel a bit wistful. What I didn't expect was that the leader refused to accept my resignation and said that if it was because of this matter, I could be transferred to another location to support a new project. Later, if I wanted to come back, I could return. After thinking it over for a day, I agreed. So I packed my bags and went to the other city. Since it was a newly developed market, internal management was somewhat chaotic. After I started, I streamlined the SPs for the positions and secured several major clients, finally establishing a firm foothold. By this time, it had been almost half a year since my divorce. The previous landlord suddenly sent me a message. Sophie, your ex-husband and his dad have already moved out. I heard they went back to their hometown. This landlord lady is about my age, and we got along pretty well. When I left, she even seemed a bit regretful. After some inquiry, I found out that Ryan probably went back to the county town. They simply couldn't afford the rent anymore. After I left, Ryan struggled on for a while, but eventually, with no money left, he had to go out to work, leaving the child in his dad's care. But his dad was unreliable. Either he dropped the child or scalded him. After watching over the child for a few days, he would lie in bed, sighing deeply, lamenting how hard his life was. At his age, all for the sake of this child, he couldn't sleep a wink every night. There was no other way. Ryan couldn't stand his dad's nagging anymore and quit his job again. He started borrowing money online to get by. Until last Sunday, when his financial chain completely broke and his contacts were exposed. With no other options, he took his dad and brother back to their hometown. Actually, things should have ended there. Ryan was living badly, and that gave me peace of mind. As long as I knew he was miserable, I didn't care about the details of how miserable he was. Anyway, I still have my own life to live. The sun was shining brightly, and watching the sun rise in the east, my heart was filled with confidence. I would definitely be fine.